All right, so we've got a hole dug out there. Let's see if it's deep enough. I think that may be just about right. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope everybody out there is having a wonderful day. It is Thursday, March 2nd here in South Georgia, and if we don't get blown away by the wind today, we're going to try to get some squash planted. And in the bed that we're going to be planting some squash, we're going to try to implement something really cool that we just got in the mail. So I'm going to show you all that too. Now, before we plant any squash, you might be thinking, Trav, it seems a little early to be planting squash on the 2nd of March. Are you sure you're done with frost? Well, no, I'm not 100% sure that we're done with any frost. The weather forecast looks pretty dang good for the next week and a half. If I can pull it up here, looks like we're not expected anything below about 45 up until March 11th. Now, our average last frost date is somewhere around the middle of the March, so we very well could still get some freezing temperatures. I'd say there's probably about a 50% chance we're done with frost, a 50% chance we'll still have a late frost. But I've got a plan for this raised bed if we do get a late frost. So this is the raised bed where we're going to try to get some summer squash planted today, and I have a setup to cover this bed if we were to get one of those late frosts. So we had some rutabagas and cabbage in here. We harvested those on the last video. Got to do a little bit different arrangement with our drip tape or drip tubing, whatever we decide to use. I don't need 4 rows of tape in here. I do think I can fit about 4 summer squash plants in here. Yeah, they're going to run over the sides a little bit, but I think that will be okay. And the reason we're using this bed is because it's one of the bigger beds and because it's one of the only ones we have open right now, and our in-ground squash plot isn't quite ready yet. So the first thing we need to do is pull up this drip tape here so we can use some of our homemade compost and amend this soil a little bit. Now, I'm not going to use this row spacing here for the summer squash that we'll be planting. I'm probably only going to have 2 lines of drip tubing. I think I'm going to put one right here and one right here. And the reason we're doing it that way will all make sense here in a little bit. Now, I could pull this whole row start valve fitting out of here and plug this with a goof plug, but these things kind of work like a goof plug, so no sense in using an additional fitting if I don't need these for something else right now. So what I'm going to do is just basically, well, if I can figure out which way to turn them, there we go, turn that valve like that, which will shut that off, and then I'm just going to unscrew the tape from it here, and we'll pull the tape up like that. So that will plug those holes in the main line, keep us from installing a new little piece of main line here, and then we can punch into it right there with our new rows. So let's get all these valves turned off here, get all this tape pulled out, and we'll save these drip tape lines here because there's no holes in them, and for all the beds that are this length, we can reuse this tape right here. So now we just need to fill our dog's bucket with some of this good homemade compost in our geo bin here. Then we'll just spread our compost out somewhat evenly over this bed here. Got a little tape in there. That stuff doesn't break down. That's okay, we'll get it out of there. And then we'll take our little cultivator here and just kind of scratch this compost into the soil a little bit, break up any clumps we've got. And we've got some worms in there, I can see. That's always a good sign. All right, that looks pretty good there. Now for the next part. So I told you earlier in the video that we had something really cool that we were going to try to incorporate into this bed, and this is it right here. So the folks over at Olle Gardens, where we got all our raised beds from, sent me this right here. I think this is a new product they've got, a worm compost bin. This is not just any worm compost bin. Yeah, we already have a worm farm over there by the barn. We'll check on that in a minute. This system is designed to work in conjunction with your raised bed. So you're doing vermicomposting inside the beds, as opposed to having the worm farm kind of stand alone by itself. So this rig here is pretty simple and it's pretty well built. I like the design of it. And here in a minute we're going to show you the full install or setup. We're going to go get some worms from our existing worm farm by the barn, add them to this, install them in this raised bed. But I just want to show you what we've got here as far as, you know, what comes in the box. So you've got this plastic container here. This will actually be buried down into the soil. It's got a top on it there. It's got this little jute mat that you're supposed to put on top of the soil inside the plastic container, wet it, keep everything nice and moist, keep the worms nice and happy. I do like this right here on the inside of the cover of the little plastic bucket. Kind of tells you what you should and shouldn't put in there. Kind of the instructions for the unit are built into it right here. This is one of the things that I really like about it. Now, we usually, or in the past, have just put our stuff that's going to the worm bin in a bowl on our counter, but you know, sometimes it starts smelling, just looks kind of nasty, having a bunch of eggshells and stuff up there. So this comes with it, and this is a little pail to keep in your kitchen to put all your stuff that you're going to feed your worms, or maybe put in your compost bin. Now I've already got mine filled up with some stuff here, coffee grounds and some veggie scraps. And on the back of this, it tells you again what you can and can't vermicompost. But this is just a neat little container here that looks nice sitting on your kitchen counter. And once you fill it up, then you can take it outside and dump it into here to feed your worms. So the first thing we need to do is to bury this container, almost bury this container. It says you're supposed to bury it up to about right here. You leave these little flower holes exposed. Now we could put it in the corner of this bed. We could put it anywhere in here that we wanted to, but for the squash that we're going to be planting, I think it's going to work good in the middle. That way we can have a squash plant kind of in each corner of the bed. So I've got it trenched out a little bit here to show me where I need to dig my hole. And we're going to pull that back and we're going to start digging until we get it deep enough to almost bury this thing. Alright, so we've got a hole dug out there. Let's see if it's deep enough. I think that may be just about right there. By the time we add all this soil back, it should be right about to that level there. I need to take out a little bit more down here. Let's try that again. Yeah, that there is going to work pretty good. Let's just kind of backfill it in here. See what we've got. All right, that looks pretty good right there. Now I'm just kind of smoothing out all this extra soil that we displaced from digging that hole there. But I'm pretty happy with that there. We can see once we add our worms and stuff in here, then we just put the lid on it like that, and it sits in the middle of this bed. And before we fill it, I'll just show you the inside here. So not a lot of that soil got in there as we were burying this thing and kind of packing the dirt around it. It's got all those holes in the sides and the bottom, so the worms can kind of come and go as they please. Now the next step is to add some worms. Fortunately for us, we've got a worm farm with plenty of worms that we can add. If you didn't have worms, you could just go to a bait store, buy a couple cans of red wigglers. Those work really good as composting worms. Or you can go online to a place like Jim's Worm Farm and buy lots and lots of worms at one time. That's actually what we did with our worm farm that we're about to go check out. So here's our worm farm that we made out of this Rubbermaid container we were using as a chick brooder. And on top of it here, I just got a piece of insulation that I cut out. It works okay as a lid. Might need to replace it at some point. And we just added some unfinished compost to this to start with. And then lots of worms. You can see the worms right there. They're nice and fat and happy in there. All in here. We had all kind of stuff. Shredded paper. That thing for the worm farm we got said not to be adding fish and stuff in here, but I put fish guts in here and they seem to really like it. I don't know if you're not supposed to do that or what, but I've been doing it. Anyways, we got plenty of worms in here to pick from. That's a fish head right there, looks like. I'm going to chunk that so it doesn't stick anybody in the hand. while they're digging around in here. But we use these for fishing. They're also just fun to come out here and feed. We've got a hole in the back of it. We can get worm tea out of it if we want to. So what I want to do today is I'm going to get some of this soil, some of these kind of castings in here, but I'm just mostly wanting to get some of these worms. So I'm going to scratch around in here, find a nice concentrated area of worms. Put that in our dog's bucket there. Good many right there. There's way more worms in here than we need, and these things will keep multiplying, so it's not going to hurt to kind of split some off like this. Look at there. Oh, a bunch of them right there. Get some more right there. So we're really just making more room for the worms that are in here by splitting them off. I don't know exactly how many worms we need for this little new worm farm we've got, but we've got plenty that we can get here. There's a bunch of them right there. Okay, that should be enough there. Spread this back out. Put this shredded cardboard on top there. Put our lid back on it. We'll go add these worms to our new worm farm. Well, as is my luck, as I was adding all this stuff a minute ago, my camera cut off. But what I did here was I took all our scraps, kitchen scraps here, coffee grounds. There were some pieces of taters in there, pieces of cabbage. You might end up growing some taters here, but that'll be all right. I put that stuff in the very bottom. Then I dumped all our worms and stuff from our worm bin in here on top. You could probably do it either way and it wouldn't matter. I'm not going to fill it up completely because we'll be adding more kitchen scraps within the next week here, and we'll get this thing full. We've got this little jute mat that's supposed to keep everything nice and moist there. I'll put it in there. I'll come out here later and wet that puppy down. For now, we'll just put the top on it like that. That's pretty dang nifty. So this should be pretty fun, seeing how it goes doing a worm farm in the middle of one of our beds as opposed to having a standalone worm farm. Now, just as a disclaimer here, Olle Gardens didn't pay me to do this video or to use this product here. The president or CEO of the company texted me a few weeks back, said, we got a new product, I think you'll like it since you already have some worms and stuff. Do you want to try it out? I said, sure, I'll try it. So I was under no obligation to do this video. I just thought it was something really neat to try here. And we don't have to leave this worm farm in this bed. Once the squash is done, we can easily move it to another bed. We could rotate it around all of our raised beds out here if we wanted to. And you don't have to have an Olle Gardens raised bed to use this. You could use it in any kind of raised bed or container, you know, for the most part, as long as it was deep enough to get that thing almost buried in there. So if you want to give this a try, you can go to their website, ollegardens.com. You can use the code LazyDogFarm to get 10% off. Now, let's plant some squash. So before we plant our squash seeds, we need to install some more drip lines. We're going to use drip tubing as opposed to drip tape. I've got these two lines that we pulled up from another bed that was exactly this size. So everything's kind of standardized. Really easy to plug and play here. We've already got the end fittings installed and the fitting that will go into that main line tubing there. This tubing will put out a little bit more water than the tape will. And that will be good in this case because we need to keep that worm farm moist, and just keeping this whole bed moist is a good idea. It keeps the soil nice and healthy. We won't need all the water that this tubing puts out for these 4 squash plants, but sometimes squash plants can get pretty big and have some pretty extensive roots, so it won't hurt to have a little extra water. So I'm going to put one line in about right here, run on that side of the worm farm, then another line right here, kind of on that side of the worm farm. So let me just go ahead and punch some holes here. Get one right there, pop that in. So that line is going to go down that way, and we'll use some staples here, kind of hold it in place. And then we'll punch another line right here, just like that, and pop that one in there, and then we'll just run these down there and kind of staple them along the way. So now that we've got our irrigation in place, let's talk a little bit about the variety of squash that we're going to be planting. Now, a month or so ago when we did a video telling you all the varieties we're going to be growing this spring, I told you there was 2 varieties of summer squash / zucchini we're going to be growing. One would be the Grand Prize, which I have right here. The other one is that hybrid Costata Romanesca zucchini called Pantheon. Probably going to say Pantheon for the in-ground garden. Going to plant some Grand Prize right here, probably some more when we get the in-ground garden ready. So Grand Prize is a hybrid straight neck yellow squash. I like the straight neck squash better than I do the crook neck squash. They hold up better during harvesting. They don't break when you're throwing them all in a bucket. And there's not a whole lot to eat on that little crook neck there. Whereas these are more uniform along the squash. You can kind of eat the whole thing. This one has a pretty good disease package on it, which we need down here. It gets hot real quick in spring, diseases get bad. And so this one's resistant, I think, powdery mildew and downy mildew. Anytime you see the name Prize in a squash variety, I think there's one called Enterprise as well. Any of those Prize squash varieties are really good ones to grow. So our goal here is to have a squash plant here, a squash plant there, a squash plant there, and a squash plant there. Eventually they'll cover this entire bed. They'll be running over the side, but we're going to try to fit 4 plants in here. That might be asking too much for this raised bed, but we'll see how it works. Now I expect these seeds to germinate pretty well, but I'm going to go ahead and plant 2 seeds in each corner here. That way, if one of them doesn't germinate, we should still at least get our 4 plants that we want. So I've got an emitter right there. I'm going to kind of plant between the emitters. Sometimes it can get too wet by the emitter, so I'm going to make a little 2 little holes there on both sides of that emitter, and then we're just going to poke a little seed in the ground here. And I've got 25 seeds here, which will be enough for what we're going to do today and enough to plant some more a little later this year. Now these seeds here are blue because they're treated. That's all I could find for this particular variety. Some people that bothers, doesn't bother me a whole lot because I really like this variety. Now we'll come over here and do the same thing. Make us 2 little holes right here. If both of these germinate, we'll just pick one of the plants. We'll thin them out later, but we should get at least 1 popping there. And then we'll do the same thing on this end of the bed over here. Now besides trying this new worm farm, there were 2 other firsts that we just did here. Number 1, that's the earliest I've ever planted summer squash. Number 2, I've never planted just 8 squash seeds. Usually we plant at least a half a row, never just planted 8 seeds. Now I would never plant this early in the in-ground garden because it would be a lot more difficult to cover those plants as compared to this little bed right here. I have some hoops and some fabric to fit this bed. I can have it up in just a few minutes if we were to get a frost around mid-March. So no worries there. And if we do get 4 nice squash plants here, that's a good bit of squash. It doesn't take many squash plants to feed a family. Now for a lot of you gardeners up north, I know you still got probably another couple months before you're planting any squash, and most of you only plant 1 round of squash, but down here we succession plant squash. So for these seeds that we just planted, as these plants get older, they will get some disease on them. Even though this is a disease resistant variety, it can't fight off the disease forever. Those older plants that get ridden with disease real bad, we don't like to leave them in our garden because we're just creating a colony for disease problems later in the future. Those older plants tend to become a little less productive as well. So when the plants get old, get a lot of disease on them, production slows down, we just pull them up, plant some more squash somewhere else. And a lot of times we can plant 2 or 3 rounds of squash before it gets kind of too hot to grow squash. So come mid to end of July, that's when I'll stop trying to grow squash. Disease pressure is too bad, insect pressure is too bad. Now we can turn around and grow some more in the fall, but there's a couple months there where there's really no point in trying to grow squash down here. So if we want to eat squash, we got to get it all done in early spring, early summer before it gets too hot. So I hope you enjoyed the video today, and let me know in the comments below what you think about our little in-bed worm farm there. You think that's going to work pretty well, or you think we're better off just keeping our worm bed over there by the barn? And as always, you can find links to all our affiliate partners in the description below. Companies like Olle Gardens, where we got these raised beds and that new little worm farm there. Got some coupon codes for some of those companies so you can take advantage of those discounts. Don't forget to go check out our website, lazydogfarm.com, where we've got fig trees for sale, got a few seeds for sale there, hats, shirts, our garden blog, recipes, all kind of good stuff over there. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to subscribe. Hit that notification button, like, and share, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.
Oh, farewell, by the beauty of your life.